Good afternoon, Tom.
Hello, Jace. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, we've reached our dozen.
Woohoo!
Yeah, so 12 eggs all lined up. Baker's dozen next week. For anybody who remembers what a baker's dozen is, of course.
Yeah.
Did you know what a baker's dozen was, Tom?
Yeah, well, I just know it's 13.
That's
something
right.
to do with the batch of loaves or something.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, we can worry about that one next week, can't we? Right. This week, heavily dominated by one major topic, which we shall spend the first part of the programme discussing. It's not going to be a 10 by 6 this week, is it, mate? It's going to be a 4 by 10. 4 by 10. Yeah, that's cool.
4 by 10 plus.
4
Yeah,
by
we're
10
going to
plus.
cut it down to 4 issues because we got a couple of slightly longer interviews and we wanted to devote enough time to have this discussion. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, let's get straight into the first topic. The England football team came very, 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 very close to being triumphant on the football pitch. It certainly it's been triumphant off the football pitch throughout the whole of the tournament and its stance. But just to concentrate on the football, I thought we were good in the first half, fairly mediocre in the second half, extremely mediocre in extra time. I think we probably could have won it if we'd gone on the front foot a lot more in the second half, maybe introduced more flair players earlier without such a rigid formation, perhaps even releasing one of the central midfield players and putting on someone like Sancho or Rashford or whoever just to mix it up a bit and do something different. And I think, like I said, to people around me when I was watching the game, I did feel a little bit like that Chiellini and Harry Kane, when they flipped the coin at the beginning of the game, they could have just said, right, we'll just go straight to penalties, shall we? Because after the excitement of obviously Luke Shaw's goal after a couple of minutes, it was right old downhill from there, wasn't it, really? In terms of the way in which they played, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, overall, Italy, best team in the tournament, not just sort of objectively, but in terms of all the statistics. Shots on goal, possession, completed passes, successful tackles, etc. But, they were way the best team in the tournament, deserved the victory. England did extremely well in the whole tournament. Great credit to the whole squad and the manager and his team. And as you say, off the pitch as well as on, they've what they've done this summer has been important, and even more so now that the final is over and we have the repercussions from that, which we're going to go on to speak about. I think great credit to Southgate and his team and the team of England players who are now speaking up for a better, more decent society, which is great to see.
Yeah. We had a crowded room. My son's friends were here, and as soon as the Italian team started running around the pitch celebrating, I turned to them and I just said, "You know what's going to happen now, don't you? 3 black players have just missed penalties, so we're going to have all the right-wing bleep who are now going to be blaming them and taking advantage of the situation." And it was, I said it because I genuinely believed it was going to happen, but I said it because it was just an instinctive feeling, unfortunately, because of the way in which this government and many people on social media, minority, has to be said, it's a minority, but it's a significant minority that makes a lot of noise, who almost entirely lack compassion, empathy, that understanding, and they lack authenticity because they're not honest, especially the politicians. They'll say these things and then automatically when pressured, they'll deny it. I mean, again, this morning, Boris Johnson in Coventry was standing up, speaking to the public, is asked a direct question, basically given the evidence about the things that he said, and he denied it. It's a real experience now. It's a Trumpian nature of politics. It's an extremely weird experience to know you've heard something, to have thought about it, to analyze it, to have read thousands, if not sometimes tens of thousands of words about the subject. And then for a politician to be appealing to a demographic who don't have the capacity to remember, or if they do have the capacity to remember, it's because they're so blindly in line with that particular politician or that ideology. And obviously post-Brexit, we discussed this a number of times, you don't need to go over it. But they're so blindly accepting it that even when the person who they know said this, they'll still stand up and say, no, they didn't, or he didn't mean that, or it was set out of context, or you're just wokes taking advantage of a situation that it doesn't exist. And it's just, it's like almost like we're all in a level of psychosis. That's how I feel. It's like society now is not responding to reality. It's responding to a person's version of, or a group of people's version of reality. Then it's then backed up, as we talked about in the past, by trolls and by people who simply seem to have a very, very dangerous and sick agenda.
Yeah. And, you know, for the benefit of the viewers, it would have been easy for Jason and I to, you know, just come on here and condemn the so-called supporters, then obviously not true England supporters, but the racists, the people that have posted racist abuse towards England players, which is appalling, clearly appalling. And we should castigate them, condemn them, their actions. We should insist that they're identified and penalised. But what we wanted to do instead was to discuss what creates that environment where people think it's okay to do that, where people hold those racist beliefs and choose to act on them, and support, you know, racist politicians, you know, and even far right groups, etc. What creates that environment? And undoubtedly, what we've seen is a use of racism, a utilization of racism by politicians and the media to promote their agenda, to gain power, to stay in power, and to gain support and to promote their right-wing agenda. And we've seen it in America, as you say. It's very Trumpian. You know, the biggest statement that Trump made before he was elected in 2016 was about building the wall. As soon as he was elected, the biggest policy he implemented was the Muslim ban. You know, these are not dog whistles; these are foghorns, bullhorns for racists and white supremacists. And of course, it's also to create scapegoats and lay blame for people's economic and other difficulties, as we've discussed on the show before. You know, what's happening is that right-wing politicians are essentially stealing all the money for their mates, for their rich mates, through tax cuts, through allowing, you know, offshore tax havens, through clamping down on workers' rights and wages, you know, having wage freezes, keeping minimum wages low. Minimum wage in America is like $7 something. It's like £5, £6 an hour. You know, tens of millions of people on poverty wages, and you know, what they want, of course, as we've discussed before, is to create the optimum conditions for capitalist accumulation, for the rich to get richer, for the corporations in particular. We're not really talking about mom and pop stores here, you know, old-fashioned quaint idea of capitalism that everyone can get on by running their own little business. Those businesses have mostly been bought up or destroyed, put out of business by the big corporations, who get richer and richer and richer and don't contribute to society. They just exploit people, they just exploit the planet. And you know, we're in that stage of late stage capitalism where we can see the destruction that capitalism is causing to people's lives and to the planet. And right-wing politicians who are paid by these corporations in the pocket, in the pay of these corporations, including fossil fuel industries, are just promoting policies or implementing policies, you know, that creates those optimum conditions for the rich to get richer. And it's been described as, both in America and in Britain, it's been, you know, the last 10, 15 years has been described as a period of time that's been seen the greatest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in the history of humankind. That's what's happened. That's what true economists, honest economists are saying this period represents: a massive transfer of wealth from poor people, from ordinary people, from society, from the public purse to the mega rich. And of course, that includes the destruction of public services that enhance people's lives and support them, especially if they're vulnerable and in need. So it's just appalling. And as we've said before, as I've said numerous times, eventually people don't vote for that anymore. They think that's really bad for me, bad for my family, bad for my community, bad for my friends and neighbours. It's really bad for anything. It's only good for the 1% richest people in the country. So I'm not voting for that anymore. The only way that these people can get a significant number of the population to vote for them is by creating scapegoats to blame. And they do that mostly by racism. They do it in other ways. For years, we've had, you know, right-wing politicians in the media rail against, you know, people on benefit scroungers, benefit cheats, you know, even at times, you know, people with disabilities and others, but and you know, they rail against, it used to be loony left councils, and now it's the war against woke and culture wars and things. So there's ways that they try and divide and rule and get support through waging war on different things. But the biggest thing they do is blame immigrants and foreigners. In America, and the right do it in America. Trump did it like no one's ever done that before, and divided America. America's now a divided country that's anti-democratic in so many ways, and is has a significant amount of hate. You know, it's a divided country that's filled with a lot of people who are now very hateful. And Trump and Fox News created that. And we're seeing that here in this country. Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, and other right-wing politicians, including Farage, have used racism. They've utilized it quite deliberately to get what they want, to get Brexit, to get you know, policies where you know, to get elected so they can implement policies where they give vast sums of money to their rich mates. And the only way that people are still voting for them is because they've taught us all, or, you know, taught a large percentage of the population to blame foreigners, immigrants, black people, etc., to create this resentment. And it's sickening. It's sickening.
I think it has to be a lot more than that, though, Tom. I mean, firstly, unless you're allowed to offer an absolute alternative to that type of dog whistle, victim blaming politics, then there is no alternative for them, is there? So they succumb to the corporate billionaire media. They read the Sun, they read the Express, they read the Mail, they read the Star, they read the Telegraph. I think IQ is slightly higher, educational background is slightly different, but ultimately they have that dog whistle day in, day out being pumped into their consciousness. So at the moment, all we're seeing is these politicians taking advantage of that. And it's interesting listening to some of the MPs, or looking at some of the MPs on social media, for example, who are in the Conservative Party, and they're basically arguing, which is like the first time I've really seen this certainly for a long time, is that the Tory politicians don't know what they're doing. They're creating the culture wars because they haven't got a clue. They didn't have a clue how to cope with austerity, apart from falling into the same old dogma. They didn't have a clue about COVID because they've spent so much time in denial. And then they're having to react really, really quickly and pull things from all around, you know, pull rabbits out of hats, which they didn't manage to do that either. They then managed to get some official scientists to stand next to them on podiums day after day after day to give them some sort of legitimation, even though a lot of people were also reporting that behind the scenes, these scientists were often extremely uncomfortable with the decisions that were being made by the Conservative politicians. But because they stood on the podium, they had no voice to contradict. They were basically told they couldn't do it. You then got a voting system that only allows the winner, which means if you have a winner with, let's say, 30%, or in this instance, the Tory party with 42, 43%, they only represent the minority. So we have a voting system that constantly, and certainly since the Second World War, every single government has been a minority government. They have all been just representative of a minority of the population. So that's not healthy, because so many people who cast their votes then just feel alienated for 4 or 5 years and not represented. So we got constant bombardment of fake news and false messages and denials of things that we know have been said. It gets to a point now where it's not democracy anymore. It's a very unhealthy situation that we've seen for millennia. I mean, the Roman Empire was no real difference. You know, they found ways of on the one hand giving to the population, on the other hand taking away, and creating this perception, you know, that they were the best people, they were chosen by the gods to rule and govern. So what we have now in terms of this white supremacy, they had their own supremacy back then, and a belief that they were superior to everyone else. Their empire collapsed, and every single government along the way, eventually, as you say, people get disturbed by the fact that they have these politicians, but we have nowhere to go. You know, with Corbyn, we had an opportunity for change, but of course they saw that the threshold of election victory was so narrow that they had to get rid of Corbyn in case he won. So they lied, and they lied again in order for just enough people to get them over the line. We say an 80-seat majority, but there's actually only 2 to 3 million votes, which isn't very many when you think that there's 70 million people in this country and there's between 40 and 50 million people who are eligible to vote. So 3 million isn't really that great, but it still means that they have a minority of the people on side, thanks to the billionaire corporate media, thanks to the pumping out of lies, thanks to finding a scapegoat, i.e. the EU, to blame for everything. And it comes to me as well, the reason I started this point is nothing has got any better. We had a Tory government from 2010 who said that they would sort the economy out by 2015. It was twice the debt in 2015 than it was in 2010. So they didn't cure the problem, they actually made it twice as bad. Brexit, the EU. What happens in 5 years' time when exactly the same things exist in people's lives, experiences that were there when the EU is in place? How are they going to explain it then? How are they going to excuse it? So this dog whistle politics that we have now, and we had over the other side of the Atlantic, this division by using this process of negative labels, it only goes so far as long as the people who believe it are ignorant, who take very little interest in politics, who have very low levels of critical thinking skills, and generally their empathy levels are very low because they don't have that compassion and desire to work towards a better society for us all. So you have to create that, don't you, Tom? Sorry, I'll come in now, but you have to create that bubble. And so it's manufactured externally all the time by these institutions, from Westminster to Fleet Street to wherever, constantly molding this bubble so there's just enough people in it to keep these undescribables in power.
Yeah.
And it's not like people don't care. I mean, sorry, Tom, if you please crack in now, but it's not like people don't care. As we've seen this week in terms of the responses, I mean, Dorset Eye has been flooded with contributions that go right to the core. They really go to the core The problem is that who reads them? Because you end up in this echo chamber where people say, oh, Dorset Eye, it's left wing, don't touch it. But the problem is they stay ignorant. They keep voting for the monster, and the monster does absolutely nothing for them. But in their minds, in their imaginations, they genuinely believe that this monster is better than another monster. But the only reason they don't like the other monster is because it's a manufactured perception, not a reality that they've ever experienced.
Yeah. What was some of, you've got some articles there, Jace, to share in case people hadn't heard of some of the criticism of Johnson and Patel, because obviously Johnson and Patel, after the appalling racist abuse on social media came out, they condemned it, but of course they stoked it. So there's several examples, in case people weren't aware, there's several examples here. So yeah, one of the best was obviously Tyrone Mings, who, if you just scroll up a tiny bit, Jace, Tyrone Mings there said, directly in response to Priti Patel, he tweeted to her after she'd criticised online racism. He said, "You don't get to stoke the fire at the beginning of the tournament by labelling our anti-racism message as gesture politics and then pretend to be disgusted when the very thing we're campaigning against happens." I mean, a great response from him, and that's exactly right, exactly what you know, gets to the truth of the matter. You know, both Boris Johnson and Priti Patel refused to condemn the booing of our players taking a knee to stand up for racial justice. How disgusting that they refused to condemn that bullying from the far right. And it was, you know, the far right were very involved in organising that and campaigning against the taking of the knee. They refused to condemn that. I mean, it goes back to a similar thing like Trump in America, you know, who very clearly on a regular basis gave a nod and a wink to the white supremacists, to the Nazis, you know, and that almost culminated, if you like, in Charlottesville, you know, the appalling scenes and murder that took place at Charlottesville, where literally Nazis were shouting, "Jews will not replace us," with tiki torches. And Trump described these neo-Nazis as very fine people. He said they were very fine people on both sides. It leads to politicians literally, you know, supporting Nazism. It's so despicable. And I mean, ultimately that culminated in the attempt to overthrow a democratic election and stage a coup, you know, an insurrection, a violent insurrection. 5 people died as a result of that, including several.
If we allow Tom, these people to have a platform, if we allow Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, Donald Trump, etc., to have a platform, they're going to appeal to the people who put them there. So if we call it a democracy, and within a democracy anything goes, until, of course, you know, that's the theory, but of course it isn't, because the establishment pick and choose who they want to be anything going. So they allowed Boris Johnson in, they allowed Donald Trump in. In some cases, people high up in the establishment manufactured them being in power. So it's logic to expect then, once they do, that the policies, the pronouncements, the sound bites are going to be to try to appeal to those people who put them there. So it's not just the individual's responsibility. It's not just the individual's fault. It's a systemic failure that allows, one, those attitudes to still exist even after people leave the education system. It's a systemic failure that we have a corporate media that plays to it purely for their balance, they're balancing their profits and their resources. And it's a systemic failure that politicians then get to govern in our name off the back of those types of attitudes. So what we do is we get hung up from, you know, blaming these individual personalities, as I've mentioned, and as you've mentioned, But it's not going to change until we have a really radical systemic overhaul. And at the moment, we're so far away from it. We have an education system that's just about preparing people for the world of work and not teaching them really, really how to think, to engage in critical thinking, to engage in analysis, to engage in evaluation, to be able to come out as human beings actually realizing their potential. So many human beings are crushed because they only want them to be working in retail, or they're working in, as shop assistants, or doing menial jobs across the whole public and private sector. And they have that one chance, that one stab of existence, and it's in a menial, low skilled, low income role. So that's the system that we have. That's the system that we currently find ourselves reproducing generation after generation. So we can shout at Boris Johnson, we can shout at Priti Patel, we can shout at Donald Trump and all those others as much as we like. But until we change the system, we're going to die, and other people are going to take our place and just continue shouting, because that's all we can effectively do.
And yes, you're right, Jason. And obviously, it's worth pointing out at this point that menial is a description. It's not meant in a derogatory way. And we've learned through the pandemic that the most important people in our society, the ones that keep society going, are people that are in low-paid jobs. That are often described as low-skilled jobs, but actually, those people that take away rubbish, that work in supermarkets, etc. These people are, and that do care work. These people are critical to the functioning of society.
Yes, but I need to come back in there, Tom. Sorry, but
yeah,
we've created a system in which we have people taking away our rubbish, and we have supermarkets. You can create a whole different type of society that's much, much, much more sustainable, that doesn't rely upon a small number of people taking our crap away once a week, or working in a massive corporate chain in which they get paid next to nothing by owners who are making millions, if not billions, off their backs, and are having houses and properties all around the planet. That needs to change. We need the way in which we eat food, the way in which we need to produce food locally. The whole notion of that side of our lifestyles needs to radically change. The way we get rid of waste needs to change radically. Not just, where does that waste go? We now know, for example, it's just taken on board ships, a lot of it, and dumped in other countries who are desperate, so they're being paid in order to take our crap.
Yeah.
So yes, those people have done an amazing job, but how aware of those people, how much they're being exploited and treated, and often how meaningless their roles actually are.
Yeah. So going back to you're right, Jason, and we have covered sort of green and ecological issues, from climate change to actual local initiatives that are good for the planet and environment and wildlife, and perhaps we should spend some time one week looking at how a society, or how communities in a very different society could work in a completely different way that's much better for people and much better for the planet. Going back to our topic, there was a quote there from oh sorry, you've just clicked off it, Jace, but there was a quote from could you click back on that? I just wanted, in case people didn't see, to mention Gary Neville.
I was going to come on to the Gary Neville one, actually.
Yes.
It corresponds.
Neville there said, so Neville there said the Prime Minister said it was okay for the population of this country to boo those players who are trying to promote equality and defend against racism. It starts at the very top. And he went on to say that we've had very poor leadership in this country for the last few years. It's a great credit to Neville for raising the level of debate above just criticising the disgusting racist actions of some people.
We can watch it now.
It starts at the top.
we can watch
Yeah.
it now. Hopefully, it seems to have vanished. So if I can get it going as soon as it comes up.
Yeah. He's a very very intelligent chap, actually, Neville. And
2-3 weeks ago, we had a manager I think everybody in this country trusts, a leader who everybody in this country trusts. We had players line up for 5 days on the bounce, telling us that they were taking the knee for racism, against racism, and to promote equality. And we had high-ranking ministers, including the Prime Minister in this country, say that it's okay for our population to boo them for taking the knee against racism and promoting equality. So when it starts at the top, what do you think is going to happen underneath in life? It promotes division. The taking of the knee over last month, when the players tried to explain it was to promote equality and be against racism, was ridiculed by our top-ranking government officials. So when we get racist abuse after a football match, at the end of a tournament, I expect it, unfortunately, because it exists, and it's actually promoted by the Prime Minister, who called Muslim women letterboxes. I said they look like letterboxes. So honestly, we've got to do something about this. I keep saying it on television. I keep getting accused of having a go at the Conservative Party. It's nothing to do with Conservative or Labour or Liberal Democrat. It's to do with integrity. It's to do with doing the right thing. We've got to make sure that we promote inclusion, we promote equality, that we promote togetherness and have compassion generally in the way in which we live our lives. And we haven't seen that at times in the last 2 or 3 years. And like I say, the taking of the knee 2 or 3 weeks ago, I have to say it again, because I genuinely think at this moment in time we're numb with what is right and what is wrong. We don't know what's right and what's wrong anymore with misinformation, with the information that's coming at us daily. But we had a Prime Minister in this country say it was okay to boo people who were promoting equality and defending racism. Just say that to yourself in your own mirror a few times and ask yourself whether that's right. And we know it's wrong. So why do we tolerate these people?
Yeah, it can't be tolerated,
But
Gary. Absolutely.
Please don't take that answer out of the rerun, will you? Thank you.
And that was so important, I think, that final sentence from Gary Neville. He knows how the corporate billionaire media work. So the bit that's likely to embarrass the establishment, embarrass power the most, is often the bit sometimes that the corporate media slides out of view. So it's left to the independent media, and he knows this as well. It's left to the independent media to keep it in, because they would never dream of taking it out, because it's probably one of the most important messages of the whole diatribe, of the whole narrative. And I think it was backed up beautifully by Billy Bragg. Just taking on board that, just do we need to worry about anything else? Let's look at the headline. Do we let the boorish minority win, or do we clear this shit out of society? Well, those on the left want to clear this shit out of society. Too many people on the right want to let the boorish minority win. And that's where we're at. And that's probably one of the major issues, Tom, that we have to overcome if we're going to be successful, if we're going to be able to, seriously challenge the inequalities, the injustices, the racisms, the homophobias, you name it. Only those on the left truly want to challenge it and overcome it. Whereas those on the right either don't care, or they might care a little bit, but they just certainly don't care enough to really stand up and do something about it. Yeah. And so that's how Boris Johnson gets into power. That's how Donald Trump gets into power. And that's why the establishment and the big corporate billionaires, they actually like the fact that these people are there, because they're taking away, as rightly, like you said, if you want a power grab and you want a wealth grab, point over there, get people stirred up about something else, something puerile. And that's what we're doing. We're getting stirred up about something puerile, instead of all of us being out on the streets, all of us saying, no, we're not going to go to work today. All of us saying, stuff you, we've had enough.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's, you know, I suppose we should wrap this discussion up, but I mean, I think what we're clearly saying is that, you know, racism is being used by right-wing politicians to gain power, to stay in power, and to keep giving vast sums of money to their rich friends, who own most of the media, corporate media, and who use that media in a way to help get those people elected. So it's a sort of merry-go-round of corruption and lies. And unless people sort of wake up to that and don't fall for it, don't believe the stuff that's encouraged is deliberately put out there to encourage them to be racist and to place blame on people who should not be blamed. Generally, other poor people, whether they're black people, disabled people, people on benefits, you know, unemployed people, even homeless people. You know, they get the blame. When and at the same time, billionaires are having jollies off into space now. I mean, people need to wake up to what's really happening. Who's taking all the money?
And also, just to finish off on this topic, those same billionaires are guaranteeing that their children, their children's children, their children's children, and so on, never have to lift a finger to work again if they choose not to. Whereas the rest of us, the rest of the whole population of this planet, almost 7.5 billion, have to in order to survive, to get by from day to day. Within the game, the ideology, the model that's been constructed for us by them. People just need generally to wake up to that single fact that the game that they're living called life was designed by somebody else, and those people are either ripping them off or they generally don't give a stuff about them. Yeah. And to move on now to a group of people who've dedicated their lives actually to giving a stuff, which is celebrated every year down here in Dorset in Tolpuddle, in the village of Tolpuddle, and it celebrates the events of farm workers back in 1834, back in the early 1830s, who stood up to major landowners, and the landowners kicked back by deporting them to Australia. And I interviewed Nigel Costley yesterday, who is the organizer of the event at Tolpuddle, and he tells a little bit about the history and how you can access this year's festival online. So here is Nigel. Hi, Nigel Costley. Welcome to 10 by 6.
Hello there. Yes, nice to be on.
Absolute pleasure to have you, Nigel. Thank you. And obviously, with the Tolpuddle Festival being online this year because of obviously all the COVID restrictions, it'd be great for you just to talk us through the event. But firstly, can you just give us a brief outline of what the Tolpuddle Festival represents and why we have it?
Well, it's such an important part of trade union history, but here in rural Dorset, it's often surprising that the trade union movement celebrates such a key episode in the development of rights for working people happened amongst farm workers from Tolpuddle. But yes, in the 1830s, following some fairly violent rebellions, the farm workers tried to protect themselves by forming what was a lawful trade union, and it sent the local employers and landowners into panic. And so we have the correspondence between the local squire and the Home Secretary, where they plotted to try and find a way of arresting the leaders of the fledgling union by charging them with taking a secret oath. And that is what they were arrested, sentenced for, and they were given the maximum sentence of 7 years transportation into the slavery colonies of Australia. But that would have been, for most, a life sentence, because few people who were transported ever managed to get the fare back home. So they would have expected never to see their families again. Their families were left without any support, in absolute destitution. And what we remember their sacrifice, but we celebrate the protests that then followed, that swept across Britain with protest meetings in many parts of the country, Huddersfield, Cheltenham, as well as lots going on in London. The unions knew that this was a challenge they had to face, and it was an outrageous injustice done to ordinary farm workers. So they organised a petition, the biggest of which, it's a record petition until only recently under Brexit has been beaten, which is astonishing given that they didn't have Twitter or Facebook or whatever to work on. And then this enormous march through London, which frightened the government. They thought a revolution was upon them. And they also argued legally, well, if it's unlawful for farm workers to take a secret oath, what about all the Freemasons and the Orange Order and members of the royal family who'd taken secret oaths? So the government backed down and not only gave them free pardons, but brought them home in triumph. And it's an episode that we remember for more than 100 years now. There's been events happening, but nowadays it's a really bright, breezy, friendly, wonderful atmosphere over the weekend with some cracking music, lots of political discussion as you would expect, and some great speeches. And we're going to try and reproduce that experience as best we can online over this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, personally, myself and my family have been attending since 2000, so over 20 years. But so how long have you been organising it, Nigel?
Probably since about then, actually. When I got the job, it was looking a bit jaded, to be fair. It was just a march and some speeches, and it needed a fresh feel. It was we didn't want a funeral march. We wanted a celebration, and I think that's what we have now. We have loads of people helping out. We're really proud of all our volunteers and supporters who make it such a great weekend.
They do, absolutely. It is an amazing, and when the sun's out, especially on the Sunday, everybody gathered on the green and in front of the main stage after the march and before the march. It's I don't think it can be beaten, to be fair. It's an amazing experience. I mean, there's so many personal highlights for myself, but I remember that to the very first year, and Billy Bragg and our second daughter, but our third child was 6 weeks old, and we got a photograph of him holding her, the whole family. That was back in 2000. Going through to like the Men They Couldn't Hang and the Mekons, and obviously meeting Tony Benn. And I also remember as Tony Benn left the year before he died, I sort of waved to him, and he waved back. And I think possibly I was the last person, to wave to Tony as he left Tolpuddle. But it is for anybody who hasn't been, and obviously it's online this year, which we'll go into in a sec. But anyone who hasn't been, they really, really, really should put themselves out and go from next year, hopefully, when it all opens up.
Tony used to talk about Tolpuddle being the way he recharged his own batteries.
Yes.
I think there is that sense for anyone on the left generally, but people of all political persuasions can come and participate and feel part of it. But for people who support the principles of trade unionism and social justice, it is an uplifting, inspiring, and I mean, what we can't really create online is that sense of camaraderie and meeting people, having a bit of an argument maybe over a way forward, but then having a pint and enjoying some great music and maybe even having a dance. But we'll give people a pretty good experience of that, we think, this year, because much of it, although we can't all be in Tolpuddle, we're going to film as much of it as we can live from Tolpuddle to give people that sense of that experience. So we have got a really good lineup, and we're trying to make the most of being online to get some international contributions, to get people who from around the country and around the world.
Yes, I've got just a little bit here. So it's Friday the 16th to Sunday the 18th, which is the sort of standard fare now, isn't it? Because it's expanded outwards, whether it used to be just a Saturday, you know, for the last, was it 10 years or so, it's expanded right out to be a weekend event.
We've got a great launch event on Friday evening, jointly with the People's Assembly and the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom and the Institute of Employment Rights. And we think it summarizes Tolpuddle in an hour and a half. So it's a mixture of some fabulous protest songs done for the occasion from here and from the States, and some great speakers. So we think that will launch the weekend, and then I can see on the screen the Friday deep discussions. Got some really good speakers and some interesting contributions. Angela Rayner, who's now in charge of Labour's response to the future of work, will be talking about just that, with some very interesting speakers to start the morning off. But climate change, food production, racism, well, I mean, it took about topical issues at the moment, and with some really good speakers.
Absolutely, and we're going on the march that I believe is being live screened outside of the estate for Richard Drax on Saturday. So that'll be excellent as well, because obviously there's lots of things going on in and around slavery justice and the demands that he hand over his plantations in Barbados to the Barbadian people.
And by doing it online like this,
yes,
because it's a happy coincidence, if you like, that we're doing this with them, Stand Up to Racism, but we can bring in speakers from not just around this country, but we can talk to people from Barbados who are organising a similar event to the Drax Hall in the centre of Barbados. So
absolutely,
this is all about solidarity with the people of Barbados. It's about, come on, Drax, hand over your states that you've just inherited, that were built on the back of the horror of slavery.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so it's great to have the events that are obviously central within Tolpuddle itself, and then outlaying events that can be screened live as well at the same time. It's sort of a bit like Live Aid in a way. Yeah, that's fantastic. That's brilliant.
And then on the Sunday, of course, we will try and reflect the traditional elements. So there will be a laying of wreaths, but again, online we can do a bit more justice to James Hammett, who is the martyr that we lay wreaths on his grave. But there will be a moving tribute from his descendant, talking about how she first discovered being a relative, being descended to James Hammett, and what that meant as she discovered who he was and the story of the Tolpuddle Martyrs. And then she will join us and a few others in actually laying a wreath. It's a moving part of the weekend normally, but I think it will be particularly, we will give that feeling online just ahead of a procession which we're restricting to sort of to represent Dorset workers through this pandemic. So we hope to fill the centre of Tolpuddle with banners from unions representing Dorset.
Fantastic. I mean, obviously, when it's a live event, pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, you know, there's loads and loads of coaches that come from all over the country, from up north, from Wales, from London, etc. And there's that brilliant camaraderie of everybody coming together, and then a lot of people going on that procession right down past the grave.
It'll be a shame that we're not able to meet everyone. It's a great event and procession because it turns around and comes back on itself, which means you can basically meet everybody.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful and friendly march through the village.
Fantastic.
Next year, we hope that it'll be a really special occasion when we can get back together again. But in the meantime, I think we will do people justice. So people watching will get that flavour of Tolpuddle. Wonderful.
And just briefly, how can people access?
We're streaming it live on our tolpuddlemartyrs.org.uk website, also our Facebook group and our YouTube channel. I think we're encouraging other people on Facebook, particularly, press that share button. We're not charging anything. This is all free to view. So the more people who share and more people who watch it, the better. and I'm sure people will dip in and out. We will try and save the key elements on our YouTube channel as well as Facebook. So please, when you've got time, please join in.
Right, so we've got the links on our article on Dorset Eye. So if anybody's not sure or not clear, then they can easily just go there. And finally, you just said as well that a lot of the events will be recorded and put onto YouTube so people can access at a later date.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes, and we will be trying to do it in chunks so that people can go back on over Facebook and watch it again if they want to see particular parts or they missed things. So yeah, and join in through the comments on Facebook. We want to be able to people to participate. Sorry, my phone is busy time at the moment.
Of course it is, not a problem. And we won't keep you any longer. It's so great to have you on, Nigel, and thank you so much. And hope everything goes well this weekend. And we'll be waving you from the Drax estate. You take care. We'll speak very soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye. So it was a wonderful chat with Nigel yesterday. And I think it's really, really important for everybody to remember that this is a festival that's principally open air, enjoying the music, enjoying the stalls, enjoying the speakers, coming from all over the country, chatting, collaborating, sometimes arguing, but going away peacefully, and hopefully thinking of solutions to how we can improve society. Obviously, with COVID restrictions, it's been online for 2020 and 2021 this year. So please click on the links, go to Dorset Eye, as you saw in the piece, click on the links, join all of the debates. They're all free, all discussions, the music, everything completely and utterly free, paid for by the trade union movement. And just have a nice, even if you're sat in the garden with a 25 degrees and a bottle of fizzy water, stick on the Tolpuddle Festival and just maybe interact occasionally whenever you feel like it. Right, moving on to the next topic, Tom, and this is again, unfortunately, we're going back to conservative journalists, conservative politicians, etc. But this is one that stood out particularly because of on top of what we've seen this weekend, the absolute hypocrisy. Now, Sarah Vine, for those people who don't know, is the wife of Michael Gove. They have just announced last week that they're separated, getting divorced, that they're still really, really good friends, but they've drifted apart. That was preceded, actually, interestingly, by a tweet by Diane Abbott some weeks ago when Sarah Vine, she works at the Daily Mail, folks, and she is vile. She really is. All she ever wants to do is attack other people for her particular piece each day, or how often she publishes. She gets paid, obviously far more money than the average income for most people in this country for writing scurrilous nonsense. And yet, as a direct result of this being announced, they asked for privacy. Now, I felt, Tom, I'm sorry, but I felt that for someone like her to be asking for privacy, given what she does. Now, what I want to do is just show a piece when she appeared on I think it was the Andrew Neil show or whatever it was, back when David Miliband, when his brother, what's his name? Sorry.
Ed
Miliband, yeah. Back when Ed Miliband was leader of the Labour Party. Now, this is what she had to say when she was challenged on the nature and the content of her article. And I think then only a few people will be still left understanding why we're particularly frustrated, shall we say, at this point.
In her article about Mrs. Miliband, compared her to an alien, compared her to Mr. Spock, and said that a government under Ed Miliband would bring a Stalin-esque situation. I mean, that was pretty tough talk.
Well, actually,
I mean, particularly from someone who's in a position to know how vulnerable you are as a political
it's
life.
interesting because when I started out on this process, I was, well, not exactly a sensitive flower, but I was certainly a much more, probably a much nicer person than I am now. You just get tough. You have to get tough, otherwise you just can't survive it. And,
yeah, but there's something else going on, which is the corrupting influence of newspapers. Newspapers want you to write that sort of vile stuff. I mean, that lady has done nothing wrong in life except that she happens to be married to the leader of the opposition. To compare her to an alien or Mr. Spock, in my view, is not justified.
Well, the piece was actually about the kitchen.
No.
As a matter of fact.
Well, yeah, and it was pretty bitchy about the kitchen.
It was very bitchy about the kitchen. And if you read...
Which turns out not to be the proper kitchen.
No, in fact, there are, in fact, two kitchens. But the point is that I'm a journalist. I write that kind of stuff. I've written that kind of stuff for the last 20 years.
Yes, but it's not nice.
And that sort of stuff, but that doesn't... Newspapers aren't meant to be nice. They're meant to be informative.
But this whole business about whether, we're going to get decent people to go into politics, when they know that not only they are going to be traduced, but their wives are going to be traduced, their children are going to be traduced.
But the moment you put your head above the parapet, you get shot down, and that's what's happened to all of us. We all have it. Samantha Cameron has it all the time.
But why doesn't someone stand
out.
up? Why doesn't a journalist stand up and say, "I'm not going to write this stuff"? I'm
well,
sorry, it's just not.
Do.
It's just not fair. This woman happens to be married to the.
And I see what you mean about the word hypocrisy, Jace.
Yeah. They want her to respect her privacy, having just admitted that.
Yeah.
Where do they get off?
Something that really struck me, seeing it is, she tried to justify her hateful article, her hateful and abusive article, by saying, that articles are not meant to be nice; they're meant to be informative. Well, her piece wasn't informative. It was a hit job. It was a hateful article on Ed Miliband's wife, calling her an alien, comparing her to Mr. Spock. That's not informative. That's not informative.
No, exactly.
And it's not journalism. She described herself as a journalism. She's not a proper journalist. She's someone that writes hateful articles with a political purpose to them.
She's a hate entrepreneur, Tom.
A hate entrepreneur, indeed. How different is she from the other types of hate entrepreneur that we've discussed in previous episodes? Making a lucrative living from spreading hate. So yeah, I mean, it was fair criticism of her, and certainly for her now to be asking for privacy is substantially hypocritical.
Yes, and I don't think anything more needs to be said, to be fair. I think the readers can make up their own mind. But I think it goes back to the previous conversations we had. Those with high levels of empathy will look at that and think it's outrageous, and people with low levels of empathy will say, what's the problem?
They'll say fair game.
Fair
if you're
game.
in the public eye, it's fair game.
Yeah.
If you're a politician, if you're a footballer, it's fair game for anyone in the media or the public to abuse you in a disgusting, inhuman way. That's part of a political philosophy these days, which is truly appalling and doesn't do anything good for our society.
And it might well be that the people who get into these positions of power and responsibility and are given the opportunity to write this garbage, that, as Clive Stafford Smith said a few weeks back, they probably all went to public school, and they're probably all beaten and sexually abused, and they don't really know any different, and any compassion that they had in them was all, plundered out of them. So, we're not saying it's their fault. We're just saying that we have to have radical systemic change within our society to reduce the opportunities for people like this, in terms of the way in which they turn out, to be, if not zero, as close to it as possible.
Yeah.
And us abusing them won't change them. Us pointing out the fact that they have no empathy and, they're racist, homophobic, and often vile, they ain't going to change because we point it out. They'll change, or their children, or their children's children, etc., etc. We need to give them the opportunity not to be like them. That is the key. That is the success story. It's a long-term project, but that's the success story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, finishing off. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at the reason why voters have rejected the parties that they've usually voted for. Next week, we're going to look at why Labour voters at the moment are saying that they are no longer prepared to vote for the Labour Party. And this week, we're going to talk to some people who have said the same thing about the Conservative Party. They've voted Conservative in the past, but now they just simply find that they can no longer do so. So here was an interview that you, Tom, and myself did together with some voters. And as I say, next week we'll go to the other side of the can and talk to some others about Labour. Hi, welcome to this edition of 10 by 6. Today we're looking at the reasons why voters have decided to move away from Conservative parties. And we have Claudia Webb and Seb Green. Hi, Claudia. Hi, Seb.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
If you can briefly introduce yourselves, just who you are, what you do, blah, 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 that'd be great. Thank you.
Seb, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. I'll kick off. So I'm Seb Green. I'm from Weymouth, and at the moment, I'm spending an awful lot of my time planning an event for next year, which I won't name.
I'm Claudia Webb, and I run a residential home in Upway. I was previously the COO of Weymouth Bid, and I also used to be a councillor, both Conservative and Green. Cool,
brilliant. Thank you very much. Just to make sure, Seb, that thing you were mentioned is not illegal, is it?
No. No. If I said event for next year, I don't want to jinx it. So if I
no. I totally get that. I was just messing around with you. Okay, I want to kick off with the first question to both of you. You can answer in whichever order. Is why did you initially vote Conservative? What was it about the Conservative Party when you did vote, that attracted you to them?
Who wants to go first?
Do you want to go, Seb?
You go first this time.
Well, I know this might sound pathetic to a lot of people, but I think it was partly conditioning. Not that my parents ever, encouraged me or coerced me in any way to vote Conservative, but both my parents were Conservative councillors, and I think that, subconsciously I thought because my parents were good people and good councillors, that being a Conservative councillor, was the right thing to do. I went to a private school for most of my childhood, and I think that probably impacted upon the way I voted as well in some subconscious way. And there are some Conservative ideals that I do agree with, as with all parties, really. It's hard to fit yourself into just the one box, but I do believe in a meritocracy, and I like the work ethic that the Conservatives seem to encourage. So, there were reasons, but the longer it goes on, the less I can remember what those reasons were, really.
Did your parents, out of interest, did they make a transitional process as well, or did they still, or were they Conservative?
Well, my mother was actually previously a Lib Dem, and she moved to Conservatives. I believe my father still votes Conservative, but they have become very involved with the Green activities that I get involved in, and I think they understand how important it is to me and to the community.
Brilliant, thank you. Seb?
Well, for me, it was a bit strange because I grew up on a housing estate, and the local councillor was a Labour councillor, and I canvassed for him local elections. And then at the time I came to vote, so obviously 18, we were faced with the global economic crisis, which Labour got the blame for, or Gordon Brown. And that was somewhat drummed into my head, whether it be through the media or whatnot. And another reason why I initially started voting Conservative was, and I only actually voted for them in 2010, was because Richard Drax, when I did a sponsored walk, prior to him becoming MP, travelled down to Cornwall and spent 2 days walking with me. So I was able to talk to him for 2 days, and for whatever reason, I thought he seemed like a nice gentleman, and I would vote for him in 2010. It was at that point I started moving away from the Conservatives. I didn't vote for them again. I moved to Durham, where I joined the Labour Party. And the 3 other elections, 2015, 17 and 19, I didn't vote for the Conservatives. In 2015, I voted Labour. And then in 2017 and 19, I actually voted for the Green Party candidate, because I decided that I would vote for the person I would best represent the area.
Oh, thank you so much. That's amazing. And it's interesting, Seb, that you said about one of your main influences came from the media, and it sounds like that you maybe you've even felt yourself that you were taken in by the media, in and around the time of the economic crisis and the leading up to the 2010 election. How about you, Claudia? Do you consider that you've been duped to some respect by the media?
No, I don't. I mean, I tried to read a wide variety of information. I seek my own information out. So and before every election, I do go through manifestos, etc., because I don't want to vote for something if I haven't educated myself in the reasons for doing so. So no, I don't think I can blame the media for the way I voted. I think I would agree with something Seb said, actually, having spent time with Richard Drax. He is a very personable gentleman, and I think, it does kind of make you want to vote for him. He's quite no nonsense, and I like that about him, and I think that was probably one of the reasons that I voted Conservative too.
Do you think that we can substitute, there's 2 things here, do you think we can substitute the terms no nonsense for lack of substance?
Well,
and can I also add to that as well? You say, Claudia, and I don't know about you, Seb, but you said that you did your research, and obviously you didn't feel that you were duped by the media in your term, Claudia. But if you look at Richard Drax's voting record, the word horrendous springs to mind.
Yes.
And therefore he might be come across as a very personable person, but actually under the surface, there seems to be something extremely sinister.
Well, I have recently looked at his voting record and was quite shocked, actually. But he, a lot of leaders get as far as they've got because of their charisma and the fact that they're personable. Much worse leaders than Richard Drax, in fact. So
but he's not a leader, to be fair, is he?
Yeah, well, you know what I mean. But
I know what you mean, but what I'm saying is, even within the Conservative Party, to be fair, Richard Drax has never been offered any position.
That's true.
They don't trust him. They don't perceive him as having the abilities to be ever offered anything.
I think that's maybe part of the reason.
Say again?
I think that's part of the reason that I liked him, because I thought, I don't necessarily agree with all the Conservative manifesto, etc. But if he's not the most popular one, it means that he must be doing something right in my eyes, if you know what I mean.
I think the thing that he does right is that he's at 150 million pounds in wealth. The thing he's doing right is that he's managed to create a safe seat within Dorset, where, let's face it, it's not likely the most politically astute county. So I think he's how would you say, Tom? The Conservative Party put up with him purely because they just don't perceive him as to be particularly bright.
Yeah,
That's certainly the response I've had from talking to senior politicians in and around Westminster of a Tory persuasion and not of a Tory persuasion. They just don't see him as particularly clever.
He's not regarded as the sharpest tool in the box or particularly politically astute. But and obviously he's in a very safe Tory seat, and his position of privilege and wealth enables him to be where he is. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned the voting record, and I hope viewers that live in South Dorset, particularly, that aren't aware of Drax's voting record, they go online and look it up, because it truly is horrendous on every issue, from all sorts of social issues through to climate change.
Same-sex marriage.
Same-sex marriage, yeah. And economic policies as well as social policies, but particularly on social policies and on green climate change issues, he's got the worst record. I mean, there was a thing a few years ago where all the green issues, the voting record of all MPs on green related issues, climate change, future of our planet, future of humanity, were compiled. And they were put from top to bottom, from the best to the worst, who's voted for the most green issues or the least green issue. Drax was bottom, he came bottom of every MP. It was truly shocking. So yeah, I wherever you are in the country, find out, don't just think, oh, my MP's quite personable, I'll vote for them. Find out what they vote for. That's the truth, find out what they're actually voting for if they're already an MP. That's really important for everyone.
And it doesn't matter what party they belong to.
Yeah.
People just got to do that thorough research before they put the X in the box.
Yeah.
What about you, Seb? In terms of that transitional process, then, and you moved away from supporting, locally Richard Drax, for example, and the Conservatives, and you only voted them to 2010. So, what was the real sort of catalyst for you that you suddenly thought, I've met Percival, Mr. Drax, I voted for him, but I'm not going to do that anymore? What was it?
Well, as I said, I tend to vote for the person rather than the party now, who I feel would best represent the local area. So, for example, when I moved to Durham and I was there for the 2015 general election, I look at the ballot paper and the Conservative candidate's address was listed as London, whereas the Labour candidate lived actually in the constituency. The Labour candidate represented the vast majority of constituents, lived locally, he knew the area, he knew the challenges, and therefore would, in my opinion, best represent the area. And then when I moved back down, despite transitioning from the Labour Party to the Conservative Party, which was a mistake, but I still didn't vote for Richard Drax because, again, I voted for the person I felt would best represent the area. And for me, that was John Orrell. Again, because whilst he lives in the ward, the constituency,
yes,
he works in the constituency, and he is aware of the serious social challenges that we have in South Dorset, particularly Weymouth. Melcombe Regis, for instance, is one of the most deprived local authority wards in England, and it's been in South Dorset under Richard Drax for 11 years, and it hasn't improved. In fact, you'll be reasonable to say it's deteriorated since Conservatives came into power under coalition in 2010. It certainly hasn't improved, and Richard Drax doesn't live in the ward. He doesn't have a surgery in the ward. When's the last time he's had a surgery in Weymouth? he might come to the slightly then ward constituency. You know, he might come to the constituency for a photo opportunity. But when's the last time he's actually walked around and properly engaged with locals? You know, when's the last time he's explored the serious social issues with deprivation, poverty, the standard of living in South Dorset, particularly Weymouth? The vast majority of constituents live in Weymouth, but it seems that he's more interested in representing those towards the east of the country.
Right, very interesting. Very interesting.
So that was a bit of a rant.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't, because it's interesting as well. There was a big discussion, wasn't there, at the hustings for the 2019 election, and he was straight into Swanage because he knew that he probably wouldn't get too much grief there. He also said that he was prepared to do something on Portland, and people were saying, "Well, why don't you come to Weymouth? You know, what's wrong with Weymouth?" And in the end, I think he may have changed his mind or whatever, but there was certainly a lot of feeling on social media that he was avoiding Weymouth, and yet he was quite prepared to go to Portland. Excuse me. I never really got to, excuse me, I never really got to the bottom of that. But now you sort of talk about he favours much more the east of the county. Perhaps he feels safer there. Perhaps because Weymouth and Portland are a particular size conurbation. Well, probably the biggest conurbation actually in his constituency, and because of the levels of deprivation, as you rightly point out, perhaps he feels that, you know, it probably goes back a lot to the way the Conservatives perceive him as well, that he likes to surround himself with people who don't challenge him. I mean, I'll just give you one very quick anecdote. When I was a lecturer at Weymouth College, one of the politics students in our group invited him to college. And he stood there, and he that morning he'd been to Sherborne School, and he stood up and he said, "Oh, I went to Sherborne School this morning," and blah blah blah. And he goes, "But I'm going to Weymouth College this afternoon. I bet I won't get such an easy ride with them." And straight away, everybody was on the back foot. And they're thinking, that's a bit of a strange way to introduce yourself to students. So he was admitting, you know, without him probably knowing, he's admitting that the public school children were going to be all sitting there, you know, very, very smart, not challenging authority in the same way as the Weymouth College students. And then he went on to say, how many girls in here are wanting to go on to university? And some of the girls put their hand up, and he said, "I think that girls of your age should be looking to work in the care sector. I don't think they should be looking to work in the university, especially if you've got young children." And one of them put their hand up and they said, "Well, I've got a young child and I want to become a doctor. Are you telling me that I shouldn't become a doctor?" And he blushed. And you could see him physically blushing. And I was just sat there, just shaking my head. It was horrific. But that was back in 2012. So he'd only been in power for, you know, or he'd only been in the constituency for 2 years. And I was kind of thinking the next general election comes along, he's got no hope. And what happens? He's still there, 3 general elections on. Tom.
I'll just share another anecdote because you mentioned the hustings at the last time. So I went to the Swanage and the Portland hustings. The Swanage one was extraordinary, probably 300 people there. Obviously a very conservative area. And yeah, in terms of an easy ride and not being challenged, the very first thing he said to the 300 odd people that were there was an enormous, calculated, heinous lie. He said, the economy, the first thing I need to tell you all is that the economy is doing really, really well. We've got the national debt down to 50 billion. At the time, the national debt was 40 times bigger at 2 trillion. It was a calculated, deliberate lie. I expect Conservatives did it all across the country, told that lie. What he was talking about was the national annual deficit. That's a different thing. But he said the national debt is down to 50 billion, when in fact it was 2 trillion. And the point is that they have doubled that despite, you know, that was after 9 years of vicious austerity and cuts. They had actually all perpetrated on the basis, carried out on the basis that they needed to reduce the national debt. And whilst making those terrible cuts and vicious austerity policies, they had doubled the national debt. Why? Because they're giving so much money to the very wealthy. And they don't want to be challenged on that. They don't want to mention it. They don't want people to talk about the national debt. So he very calculatedly came out and told this enormous lie that the national debt was down to 50 billion, you know, when it's 40 times bigger. It was truly despicable, disgusting. But I expect Conservatives had been told to say that up and down the country.
I think there's a major issue there.
Go on, Jason.
So I just think the major issue there, though, for me, is that if you go along and you say they're interested in politics, and you go along, take for a hustings, I know it's sometimes, you know, a lot of voters will just go along. They've already made their mind up, so it's very dogmatic. But actually, it is up to us as voters, and as Claudia and Seb have identified already, it's up to us to do some work, to do some research, to find out for ourselves. Because you can only get away with a lie if you choose to be ignorant. In other words, if someone tells you that, even if you didn't know that, and even if someone tells you that, you know, they've reduced the national debt to 50 billion, it's up to you to go and check your facts. If you walk away and really believe it. Sorry, Claudia?
Sometimes you want to believe the lie, though, don't you?
Of course. Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah.
For many years, you know, and you want to be loyal to the party you've been voting for all this time, then you can, you know, we all choose to believe things that aren't true, don't we? Whether in our personal lives or in politics.
you do, Claudia, but you and Seb have identified very clearly that you're prepared to make a transition. And there's a reason why you've moved from A to B. Whereas, like you say, there's a different understanding for why people choose to vote A, and no matter what people tell them about A, they still vote A. You know, we could look into the psychology of it, but we haven't got the time. But you know, it's interesting for just to, as we sort of round up a bit, if you could identify why, in terms of your experiences, why you both think that you're different to many people. If you want to start off, Seb, you know, in terms of your interactions with people along the way, what is it about you that's enabled you to make a transition, whereas many others simply don't?
I think having ASD helps. It's the way I think, and I do my own research. I do my own research, and I'm happy to engage people in conversation in reasonable debate. And from that, and I don't always win a debate. So I actually like it when I lose a debate, and it's like, oh, I didn't actually know that. Thank you for telling me. But it's through having the willingness to engage in reasonable debate and even accept when you're wrong, that I think sets me apart. And I'm not staunchly loyal to a political party. As I hinted, I've been a member of 2 political parties, both ends of the spectrum. Yet, politically, I'm more on the fence, middle, not on the fence, centre. So, I think having flexibility is probably what's up.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Claudia.
I think we all change with age, you know, and I read a lot. And so the more I read, the more I learn. So, and I feel able to change my mind if I want to, if I've learned something that's made me think a different way. And it's not possible for me to pretend to be someone I'm not, which is why I couldn't continue as a Conservative councillor, because, you know, I was living a lie, really. And I don't like being told what to do very much. And I was being told what to do, and I didn't appreciate that. Within the Green Party, you have the freedom to vote the way you want to vote, you know, to discuss the ideas that you want to discuss and not be judged for them.
Which is not much more democratic in the Green Party.
Definitely. And when I was on the council with John Orrell, he was really supportive, and he would never have told me which way to vote ever. And, you know, he's someone that I greatly respect, and his way of going about things, you know, in a non-confrontational manner. But he's clearly a very educated man, and he really inspired me, I think, to make the change, along with, you know, councillors like Claire Sutton, for example. You know, good people doing good things, and not for ego, and doing things in the community, because I was never a councillor who was you know, interested in sitting with officers for hours on end, going over the budgets and all that, and audits and all that kind of thing. I just wanted to help people in the community, and I think, you know, councillors kind of fit into one of those two boxes usually, and I don't think that I really fit in the Conservative Party at the time with that tactic, and I was very much kind of put to the side. You know, don't worry, Claudia, you can organise the Christmas party. I'm like, oh, great, thank you. So yeah, I felt uncomfortable and not respected as a woman necessarily. I don't want to accuse anyone of sexism, but at times that's what it felt like to me, and I'm not really used to experiencing that, and it was a bit of a shock to my system.
So they're called Conservative for the very reason, aren't they? That they're conservative, that they don't like change.
But there were two things that I was told while I was canvassing for the Conservatives back in the day. One was, don't bother with any houses that have more white goods in the garden than they have in their kitchen, because they're not the kind of people we want anyway. And two was, always make sure that you go to funerals and church services, because that's how you get your votes.
Wow.
Oh my God, was that? I'm shocked. Even I'm shocked that those were two things you were told. Oh my God.
All I was
Wow,
told was use a wooden spoon. That was it for the letterbox.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. That's a good tip.
Yeah, that's all I was told. I was crazy. There's a house in Preston Downs in part of Weymouth, and it clearly says on it no canvassers. And I went, you know, oh well, I'm going to knock on it anyway. Probably shouldn't. And when the man opened it, he actually shook my hand and said, well done for having the guts to do that. That was whilst actually canvassing for a Labour council.
But because if you knocked another the following day, though, you could have had a bucket of sewage tipped over you from the bedroom window. So it's, you know,
yeah. I obviously caught him on a good day.
You know, they were just listening to, that was fascinating. You both explaining sort of,
yes,
you know, how you transition from voting Conservative to something else, and supporting a different party or parties. And there were some common things, I think, that that you both expressed that you don't find in everybody. The three things I noted from what each of you said, that you both said that you're open-minded. You both, rather than sort of fixed and never changing, that you're open-minded, that would suggest a sort of willingness to change your mind. You both said about reading and research. Seb, you said about research. Claudia said about reading. So you're both obviously going to spend time actually reading and researching facts and truth. And the other thing is that you both seem to have expressed that you want to learn. You don't mind if you're proven wrong in a debate or discussion, and you're willing to learn. And I think one of the things that people are very fixed about these days, that's the opposite of what you said, is that if people are shown to be wrong, they still won't admit it, because they don't want to be thought of as gullible, as having been taken in by the lie, whether it's the sort of Brexit position or whether it's any other sort of political thing. If they're shown that what they believed in and argued for is actually not great, or not the right thing, not the truth, they'll still defend it, because they don't want to be thought of as having been gullible. So they carry on. It's the same in America with the Republicans that support Trump. You know, they don't want to be seen as having been taken in by the lies, so they just double down. Whereas you guys, so yeah, open-mindedness, reading and research to learn, but also being you know, willing to accept that you know, that maybe you weren't you know, you weren't right about something before, but you've learned and moved on to something different, rather than sticking to something that you now know is wrong. So I mean, well done to both of you for those characteristics. I thought, you know, wouldn't it be an incredible and very different world, society we lived in, if everyone just had those three traits?
Well, obviously, I'm rarely wrong. That was just the one time.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you, Claudia. You're like 99.9% of the time, but you know, those traits that you've identified there are very positive traits in terms of how you place your vote, your allegiance, your support. But I'd argue that those things are fairly rare in our society. You know, being open-minded, spending time reading and researching, and not being afraid to sort of say, I was wrong about that, I've changed my mind now. Those things are pretty rare. If everyone had those things, wow, you know, our society politically could go somewhere.
But despite my parents both being conservatives, I think I can probably thank them for that, because they always ensured that I was well educated, well traveled. I've met a lot of many different people thanks to my parents, been exposed to many different kinds of lifestyles, and I think it's probably because of that I am open-minded and interested in other ways of living or thinking.
Yeah,
which of course isn't an opportunity open to so many people. So I'm lucky. So it may explain exactly, but it may explain why certain demographics not having those opportunities or not having those skills that they're conditioned into.
Yeah.
So it's not about blaming them; it's just about understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Seb.
I think one of the issues that I don't really think gets explored a lot, or enough as it should do, is the impact of social media and what that has had on our political landscape. It is huge. Because, I mean, for instance, I speak to people on social media from across the political spectrum. I know people that vote Conservative, Green, etc., etc. Whereas right wing, left wing, middle. But you've got a large swathes of the country, the electorate, who only associate themselves on social media with people who think the same. So their news feeds and everything they read and watch on social media is supporting their narrative or beliefs almost. So they're not even encouraged to think differently. Because for whatever reason, they refuse to engage in debate, and they delete people off their social media that perhaps don't vote the same way as they do. And I think that's one of the issues, and I think that does need to be explored more, or the impacts of social media and how that impact how people vote.
Well, it would certainly explain the hundreds of millions, if not billions, that both the Conservative Party and the Republican Party spent in the last few elections targeting people on Facebook, particularly, and which they've been, you know, held to account for. And now, ironically, in this country, obviously it's the Conservative Party, but it's the Democrats that are taking over, obviously, in the States. So they're probably a little bit more open to this, but they're now looking into ways in which Facebook cannot become so politically biased based upon the amount of money that they're given to target people on their platforms, because that's obviously had a massive impact, just like the amount of money that's spent by advertisers trying to persuade us to buy products, even though many of us simply don't need them. And that's how it works, isn't it? Back to what you said, Claudia, about the psychology of it. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Is there anything else that any of you'd like to say at this point, just to round things up in relation to the topic?
No, I think you should just always go with what you feel, you know. And it wasn't easy changing political parties, and I took a lot of flack over it, but I don't regret it for a second, because you have to do what you think is right. Everyone has to have integrity. Whether people agree or disagree is relevant, but you just have to do the best you can. Excellent.
Thank you. Sab?
All I would say is that I think people should have confidence in how they vote, that they're voting for the right person or the right party. And if they are not 100% confident, then they should consider voting for someone else. And do your own research. Don't when you do your research, gain information and data from various sources, not just Daily Mail or the Sun. You know, actually read stories, for instance, from the Daily Mail and the Sun, and perhaps the Independent and the Guardian as well, because you will gain a better understanding of the situation by having a broader range of sources. So don't be afraid to do your research and vote for the person you feel would best represent you, even if that means changing the vote.
And be tolerant of other people, even if you don't agree with the way they vote, because we can always learn something from each other. And the amount of hatred that I've seen on Facebook, especially after Brexit and the national election, you know, comparing people who voted Conservative with, you know, child murderers and things like that. It's not a way that any political party member should behave at all. And just because someone votes Conservative does not mean that they're a bad person.
Okay, thank you very much. Tom, anything you want to say at the end?
Not normally, no. I'm kidding. I'm so kidding. No, just Seb mentioned something earlier, just a last point for me. I mean, I plead with any viewers, you know, thinking about their political choices and their vote, look at policies, look at the policies, the manifestos, and look at the voting record of people already as MPs. Make your choices based on that. Not social media, not other types of media, really, and not even what they say, but what they actually do. So the policies that they've pursued in the past or promised in the manifesto, do you agree with them or not? How much for each party? And because, like Claudia said earlier, you know, you don't have to agree with everything that each party says. So you make a choice based on the party whose policies you agree with the most. So yeah, you know, policies and voting record if they're already an MP, or if they've been a councillor, you know, have a look at their voting record. And the other thing Seb mentioned earlier about, you know, someone that had been parachuted in is the phrase, you know, someone when you were up north, you know, the one of the candidates was sort of from London. It's crazy how, you know, all parties do this. They parachute in candidates that don't live in the constituency, usually lose, you know, and so they should. I certainly think that all candidates should be local. I'm just amused at the thought of Jacob Rees-Mogg when he was a young man in his 20s in the first general election he stood for as a Conservative. He got sent up to Scotland and he took his nanny. He was 26 years old, I think it was. He took his nanny canvassing with him, handing out leaflets. His nanny. I bet that went down really well with the Scots.
Which is great. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate this. Thank you so much for coming on 10 by 6 and speak again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
That was fascinating, Tom. And I'm sure this is something we may come back to in future, because I know one of the ideas that you proposed is for us to have vox pops. So I think this would be something we can regularly do, just find out from people, not just on voting, but on a whole range of topics, why they do what they do and why they've made changes in their lives, etc. and etc. So that'd be really interesting. As I say, next week we'll look at Labour.
I think I should just say quickly is that you know, I think it's interesting for us to explore with people the notion that currently both major parties are not offering solutions that actually our society needs, that people, families, communities need, and our society as a whole needs to thrive, so that everyone does well in our society, we do well as a country, etc. And even contribute to global efforts to save the planet and so forth. Our two main parties are not offering the solutions that are needed. And so it's interesting to explore with people why they've moved away from one party or another, and perhaps towards parties that, who knows, in 50 years' time, maybe Labour and Conservative will no longer exist, and other parties, you know, maybe Green, maybe Socialist, maybe something completely different, will emerge and be the parties that people vote for because they think they offer better solutions. Be interesting to explore that. Yeah.
Yeah, and next week I think we should also look at the evidence that's come out from NASA, which has been come out into some of the media today, which we published a big article on it. I don't know if you've seen this, Tom, about the moon wobble in alignment with climate change and how the 2030s across the planet could be absolutely devastating. So again, it's down to us. We either sit back and say there's nothing we can do about it and just ride it and try and survive it, or we do something about it. And as humanity, I would argue that we should be doing something about it. But as I say, there's plenty of people who just want to deny it or ride it. Okay, well, see you next week for the Baker's Dozen.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks to everyone for tuning in and watching.
Yes,
whether you've
absolutely.
watched the whole episode, we always post the whole episode in one go, but we also post the individual segments. So whatever you've watched, thanks for tuning in and supporting us. We do have an actual 10x6 specifics Facebook page now.
That's right.
So if you're not already following us on there, if you're on Facebook, do look for the 10x6 page. Where all the videos are posted on there too.
Yeah, and please, if you go onto our YouTube channel, please subscribe and follow us, because obviously the greater number of subscribers, the more people will get to see us. That'd be amazing.
It's free subscription.
Oh yes, oh yes.
It's just free. It's just a click.
Yeah, exactly. You take care, mate. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Jace. You too. Bye, everyone. Cheers.